Welcome back to Inside Story. Well, Egypt's nuclear ambitions have always been closely tied to politics. The country began its programme back in the 1950s, researching peaceful uses of nuclear energy with help from both superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States. Then, as concern grew over Israel's nuclear activities, Egypt threatened to develop the bomb in the early 60s. Efforts reverted to a civilian nuclear programme through the 70s and 80s. That was shelved, though, when the Chernobyl disaster of 1986 raised concerns about safety. Well, the decision now, after 20 years, to build several nuclear power plants is the latest in a series of similar proposals from countries in the region. Turkey, Jordan and several Gulf states have said in recent months they want their own nuclear energy programmes. Yemen signed a deal with a US firm last month to build civilian nuclear plants. Algeria has signed an accord with the US on civil nuclear power, that was in June. And Morocco has just signed a deal whereby France will help it to develop nuclear reactors. None of these, though, are as controversial as Iran's nuclear project. So just how does Egypt compare with that? Well, Egypt says its aim is to develop a nuclear programme to expand its energy options. President Hosni Mubarak has pledged not to develop a nuclear bomb and to work with the United Nations nuclear agency, the IAEA. Like Egypt, Iran has signed up to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, an international agreement to limit the spread of nuclear weapons. Unlike Egypt's plans, Iran enriches its own uranium. And the United States says that's a sign Iran is trying to develop nuclear weapons, accusations which Tehran denies. The UN Security Council wants to stop Iran from enriching, but an August UN report said it continues to do so. We're joined still by our guests. In Cairo, Mohammed Nasser Al-Sayed, a nuclear energy expert and a professor of nuclear safety. In Washington, D.C., Joshua Muravchik, a resident scholar of the American Enterprise Institute. And also in Washington, Munthia Suleiman, a national security affairs analyst and the Washington bureau chief for Al-Mustaqbal Al-Arabi journal. If I could come straight to you, Munthia Suleiman, is the support of America for this particular nuclear programme in part to try to counter the impression that is sometimes given that America or the West have double standards when it comes to nuclear energy, that they allow it elsewhere in the West, but they're not happy with it in certain areas? So if they support this one, they can say, well, actually, that's not what it's about when it comes to Iran.
Well, this is reinforced, that double standard, but it is also a lucrative business for the advanced countries, especially United States, Russia, France, maybe China, that, but in particular, probably now we're talking about United States and France, who are probably going to be the source of building or the instrument of building those new. Suddenly, we have a race in a nuclear energy, while I still believe the priority of investing should be in the wind and solar energy. And I think there is some examples even in UAE for solar energy, and even in Egypt, if I'm not mistaken, for wind energy. And instead of spending billions and billions of dollars in this area, we need to have different approach. And the implication of this, eventually everyone wants to have probably what I call it the Japanese option, which means that what is now Iran is being accused of pursuing, which means that the ability to transfer after obtaining the technology, to be able to transfer to a weapon technology or weapon trying to manufacture weapon based on the technology that you have. So Josh, I think we need to have a different approach.
On that point specifically, Joshua Muravchik, can I bring you in? Because that's the concern in some parts, isn't it, that people go from a civilian nuclear programme and then use that to develop a more sinister programme, or at least a nuclear weapons programme. That was the case with Pakistan, for instance. Why would this be different here?
Well, I think the difference is that danger does exist. That's a danger that's inherent in the original conception of the IAEA, which goes all the way back to the early part of the nuclear era, in which it was decided that there would be this international agency under the UN's umbrella, and that it would provide aid to any country that wanted it in developing nuclear power for peaceful use, but there'd be a trade-off, and the trade-off would be that that country would have to enter into a certain kind of agreement with the IAEA, in which it was subject to inspections, in which it would have to give an accounting on a regular basis for its nuclear activities, in the effort to try to assure that this was not something that was secretly moving toward a nuclear weapons program.
Okay.
In the case of Iran, Iran was kind of a classical case of cheating. That is, some Iranian dissidents came forward. They had spied, or they had agents, and they came forward with the information that Iran was confronted with, and Iran was forced to admit that it had been lying for 18 years about its nuclear program. So the question that's what's different here is that that the Egyptian government has announced right at the top that it wants to do this, and wants to do it in a legal framework with international cooperation, and presumably the IAEA will work out an arrangement with Egypt so that its activities will be monitored.
Okay.
If
at that point, sorry, can I just bring in Dr. El Sayed? I mean, we were talking there about the IAEA monitoring, and Egypt says it would sign up to that. But how easy is it once you have the civilian technology, because you've worked in this field? How easy is it once you've got that civilian technology to transfer it to something more dangerous?
First, this mixing between civilian energy production and the military application of nuclear technology, the separation is big. The only common area is the knowledge. But if you take this argument that the knowledge which is common between military application and civilian application, so we have to close all our laboratory of pharmaceutical and biological research and the chemical research, because this also can lead to some dangerous application. That's first thing. Second thing, that we are working in the nuclear field from more than 50 years. And all our work is made under the supervision and of international community and the International Atomic Energy Agency. And we had never get a problem. And it was declared by our president that our program will be clear in cooperation with international community and with the International Atomic Energy Agency. This has to be clear, but I found always this mixture between the application, which are really so far. A nuclear power plant, particularly those of pressurized water reactor, is very, very difficult to be converted to military application.
Okay, let me just stop you there.
Technically speaking.
Let me just stop you there. So, Munthia Suleiman, is there a worry? I mean, countries like Israel have actually not said anything so far about Egypt's nuclear power plans, partly probably not to draw attention to their own nuclear program. But is there a concern, presumably on their part and on anyone else's part, that at the moment the people in power in Egypt might be saying they want to use it for civilian use, but down the line it could be a completely different story? For instance, Iran originally had help from the United States under the Shah to develop its nuclear ambitions, and in fact in the end what they're doing now is obviously not to everyone's taste. So is there a scenario where that could happen?
That's why the wrong approach is really to pursue and encourage nuclear energy instead of working like there was attempt by United Nations since 1974, and even there is a resolution 1991 regarding disarming a weapon of mass destruction, the so-called, that we could not find in Iraq, that one provision called for to consider the situation in Iraq as a first step toward nuclear-free zone and weapon of mass destruction-free zone, even with the means of delivery, which means the missiles. So I think the Israeli, who they don't oblige themselves to any kind of safeguard or international monitoring, they are continuing to develop a sophisticated weaponry, nuclear weapon, and they are also a danger to the region. Even the people who work at Dimona and surrounding area are suing the government for all kinds of diseases that they have been having. At the same time, the accident of Chernobyl could be repeated whether in Israel or whether in the United States, 3 Mile Island situation, and even in Russia. We heard last week there was some kind of an incident in a limited way. So I think we need to approach this in a total way of encouraging the region to get region after region to be free zone of nuclear weapons to begin with, or weapon of mass destruction. I think encouraging now the countries to develop this nuclear energy, eventually it can be going toward the road of probably weaponry, and I think this is going to be an arms race. I'm
afraid I have to stop you there. We've run out of time, sadly. Thank you all, three of you. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for watching this edition of Inside Story. Do join us again next time.